Following the vote to bomb Syria, it seems that some MPs are looking to hop onto the internet harassment bandwagon. The Tory, that is Conservative MP, Lucy Allen, bravely spoke out against online abuse by sharing an email from a constituent to which she had added a death threat, or comment that could be interpreted as a threat. The point is, it wasn't actually in the email. I will put links to coverage of this story in the description box. It's pretty pathetic. But what this video is about is a Labour MP called Stella Creasy. She also voted in favour of the airstrikes, and has now spoken out against online abuse. Let's see what she had to say to Krishnan Guru Murthy in a clip published by the Channel 4 News YouTube channel.
I think it's got worse around two particular factors. First and foremost, the volume of the abuse that you get. To give you an example of this, immediately after the Syria vote, I got 12,500 tweets within a couple of days, 2,500 in the first day alone.
Good. People are comfortable speaking their mind to politicians. Publicly.
That makes it impossible for anybody to engage in the material being sent to them. Volume is also something a lot of the young campaigners talk to me about being bombarded with messages that just simply make it impossible for them to respond. So I certainly think that volume point is new.
Yeah, and so what? She and everyone else will just have to get used to the idea that you cannot respond to every message, and instead find another way. You could see if there are any key points repeating and address them in a statement. Just explain that you're inundated with messages. Or understand that some people are going to vent.
But is that abuse, or is that just people
Well, some of
talking?
it, no, a lot of it is abusive. Absolutely, there is some of it which is disagreement, and some of it is comment. But the point that there is a conversation going on which you simply cannot respond to in of itself is a deliberate tactic. It's called doxing.
Sorry, what?
But the point that there is a conversation going on which you simply cannot respond to in of itself is a deliberate tactic. It's called doxing.
So obviously, that is not doxing. But on top of that, I don't think that's happening. She's describing receiving lots of angry messages as a
deliberate tactic.
Deliberate tactic employed by who? Could it not just be that individuals have decided to express their frustration at her vote to blow human beings to pieces? That sort of thing does tend to be controversial. I don't think getting lots of messages about that requires organisation or strategic thought. There certainly are groups of activists, in particular those targeting her for deselection, who may well be trying to pester her on social media or something. But to say the thousands of messages she got were part of a tactic, which suggests it was one unified, organised strike of communication, is going to require proof for me.
And we know that it's been done in other formats. It's certainly happening online, both in Facebook and in Twitter, to campaigners.
This doxing, she calls it, has been done on other formats, and it's happening to campaigners. Cut that shit out. This is just about use of language, but compare that to saying, say, those who are involved in politics and make themselves easy to contact sometimes receive vast quantities of messages over short periods of time.
The second element of it, which I think has got a lot worse as well, is the nature of the violence involved.
Cyber violence.
Look, I've been campaigning around violence online and online harassment for some time, but the numbers of people now reporting routinely getting rape threats, death threats, bomb threats, misogyny has got a lot worse as well. So I do think it is evolving.
So we've been given a quantity, and now we're being given a quality. Problem one is volume. Problem two is that the nature of the bad messages has changed. They're threats now, or at least more people are reporting receiving threats. But what does that mean in terms of overall quantity of threats? Credible threats, I mean. And how does that relate to this huge volume of messages she's complaining about? That's left to the imagination. Sounds really scary though, doesn't it?
My biggest concern though is I think a lot of this is starting to contaminate offline debate as well.
What is it you fear though in terms of the online world contaminating the real world?
I bet she's terrified of Bitcoin becoming our national currency, or maybe she's worried that her rare Pepes will be devalued once they're printed on cringeworthy novelty t-shirts. Dear viewer, I would like you to answer this question for yourself down in the comment section. So here it is once more.
What is it you fear though in terms of the online world contaminating the real world?
Alright, so what is Creasy's concern?
When I speak to these young campaigners, they have amazing insight into the changes they want to see. They have all sorts of thoughts and issues they want to campaign on, but they're not coming forward. And actually, it's not just about young people. A whole range of people have started to say, actually, I'd really like to get involved in that, but I'm frightened about what response I'd get.
Teach them not to be. What's actually come out of any of this? How many people who've received death threats have been hurt? I'm being told that there are fucking loads of threats. How many people are getting hurt? Sounds like there are loads of bullshit threats. Otherwise, we'd be talking about death and mutilation, wouldn't we? Not the kinds of words people use in tweets are evolving.
that damages us all. When we don't hear every single voice in our society, then our democracy suffers, our decision-making suffers.
Yeah, I tend to generally agree. And it would be better if people didn't make threats. But what it would take to totally get rid of that shit would be dreadful. So, you have to be brave. And in some ways, it's your duty to be brave, for the reason she just said.
Our culture suffers too.
But do you think it's happening in the real world? That
Yes,
kind of
I do.
intimidation?
Yes, I absolutely do. I think that people are feeling put off getting involved in public debates. People are feeling frightened about the kinds of things that they might be exposed to, the kind of derision they might get, the kind of abuse they might get. That is very different from people disagreeing with you. That's very different from a robust debate.
Yeah, I know I've only let it play a little bit again, but two things. I think people are afraid of disagreement, and I also want to say that I like that she's saying it's people being frightened of these things. The fear of it. Because I agree, that's the problem. It isn't how things are, it's how things are being presented, and what's being pushed as a reasonable response to it, or at least accepted as a reasonable response. But of course, as you'll see, she doesn't actually go down that path. Because why would a politician say, nut up, instead of going, let me put my fingers into this, I'll protect you?
I mean, you've had kind of online activism since Syria that is different to the abuse you were getting before. Are you getting the same thing in the real world, offline as well?
Well, I've experienced abuse online for some time in a range of ways. Certainly since the Syria vote, there was an escalation in the volume, and that's one of the things I think is newer for people, is the sheer volume of messages that you get. So the impossibility of even beginning to respond, even beginning to engage, even beginning to reply to people wanting to ask you questions in amongst all the abuse.
Oh, so the problem is legitimate stuff being mixed in with abuse and shitposting. Solutions to that already exist. On Twitter it's especially easy, and I presume Twitter's where they're getting the most of the spam. What she can do is go to tweetdeck.twitter.com, make a new column with her mentions in it, and exclude tweets with bothersome words like bitch, slut, whore, or Syria.
But one of the things I think we've also noticed, I talk to a lot of young women who, for example, set up feminist societies in their schools.
Known for making sure everyone can speak.
And they say exactly the same phrases and the same attitudes are being exposed to them in person as online as well.
Hang on, attitudes and exactly the same phrases. Did these poor feminists get memed on?
People being that abusive?
Yes, and I think that's what really concerns me, is that there isn't this divide between the online and the offline that people used to say, well, just ignore it. I don't think it's for anyone to ignore it. I think it's for us all to say, this isn't the kind of debate, this isn't the kind of public sphere we want. We do want people to disagree. We want people to have a debate.
Finally, here is the first really big thing. I think that, especially when it comes to what she's talking about here, mobs and abuse, there is a massive divide between the online and the offline, to the point that things I would consider abusive in person, I welcome online and wouldn't want to be restricted from receiving unless I decide to filter it out. Communication over the web and the ability it gives you to control what you see, to me, means that things that would indicate danger in real life are now free to be used as part of expression, and swarms of people and masses of communication can be filtered, whereas a real crowd of that size would force you to face an unintelligible roar. So yeah, there is a divide. Having said that, I think part of the implication is that stuff happens online and leaks into real life, but I simply don't buy it, and it hasn't been proved to me. There's very, very little I'd want to be unacceptable completely, and I'm fairly certain that it's all already illegal. Real threats and stuff like that.
Give me an example of the kind of stuff that you're getting.
I've had the full gamut from people suggesting that I should be spat at in the street and bottled, that I should be knifed.
I think you can get in trouble for saying stuff like that here in the UK, but I don't think you should.
I've had bomb threats, I've had death threats.
Yep, legit threats. No, thank you.
I've had quite specific threats about my persona. I've had people looking up my offices and saying they'll find me on particular roads. I've had the full range of things.
I'd be very interested to know the quantity of messages that fall within that spectrum, from suggesting she be spat at to finding where she is and threatening her there. I wonder why a number like that isn't being presented. Anyway, skipping the next little chunk, because it's just about Labour constituents protesting and Corbyn. What's after that is much juicier.
But I also think we have to do more than say this is about having a kinder Twitter feed. We have to be clear about why it matters to have a public space where you can have debate, disagreement. That means looking at some of the technical things you could do. For example, when somebody says, I want you to stop contacting me, that being respected, because that's part of our harassment legislation.
I'm just going to say okay, I have my own worries about certain implications of that when it comes to how social media works, and I don't think it matters so much online because you have the ability to block people out so easily. But she doesn't go into it, so I'm not going to go off on that tangent now, because that's easily another video's worth of discussion. let's carry on.
But also having some technical fixes that mean if somebody mutes somebody on one platform, they mute them across the others. These things aren't impossible to do. What Yvette Cooper and I are trying to do is bring together the technology companies, the campaigners, the police to say, actually, how do we fix this so that everybody can be heard?
And there we go, a clear example of what we can do by bringing together tech companies, the police and campaigners. So what would they need in order to implement that? The first thing that comes to mind is knowledge of which accounts across all social media are that individual's. And then the thought that naturally follows is, how would they get that information? Someone who's going to harass or abuse or threaten isn't going to just give that up, they're going to try to get around it. But then I remembered, she only mentioned police, tech companies and campaigners coming together. She didn't say anything about needing your cooperation. I'm sure nothing could go wrong or be abused if these people get their way. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.